This is Chapter 49 of Following the Equator. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Following the Equator by Mark Twain, Chapter 49. Pajamas. Day scene in India. Clothed in a turban and a pocket handkerchief. Land parceled out. Established village servants. Witches in families. Hereditary midwifery. Destruction of girl babies. Wedding display. Tiger persuader. Hailstorm discouragers. The tyranny of the sweeper. Elephant driver. Water carrier. Curious rivers. Arrival at Allahabad. English quarter. Lecture hall like a snowstorm. Private carriages. A milliner. Early morning. The squatting servant. A religious fair. He had had much experience of physicians, and said, "The only way to keep your health is to eat what you don't want, drink what you don't like, and do what you'd druther not." Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. It was a long journey, 2 nights, 1 day, and part of another day, from Bombay eastward to Allahabad, but it was always interesting, and it was not fatiguing. At first the night travel promised to be fatiguing, but that was on account of pajamas. This foolish night dress consists of jacket and drawers. Sometimes they are made of silk, sometimes of a raspy, scratchy, slazy woolen material with a sandpaper surface. The drawers are loose elephant-legged and elephant-waisted things, and instead of buttoning around the body there is a drawstring to produce the required shrinkage. The jacket is roomy, and one buttons it in front. Pajamas are hot on a hot night, and cold on a cold night, defects which a nightshirt is free from. I tried the pajamas in order to be in the fashion, but I was obliged to give them up. I couldn't stand them. There was no sufficient change from day gear to night gear. I missed the refreshing and luxurious sense, induced by the nightgown, of being undressed, emancipated, set free from restraints and trammels. In place of that, I had the worried, confined, oppressed, suffocated sense of being abed with my clothes on. All through the warm half of the night the coarse surfaces irritated my skin and made it feel baked and feverish, and the dreams which came in the fitful flurries of slumber were such as distress the sleep of the damned, or ought to, and all through the cold other half of the night I could get no time for sleep, because I had to employ it all in stealing blankets. But blankets are of no value at such a time. The higher they are piled, the more effectively they cork the cold in and keep it from getting out. The result is that your legs are ice, and you know how you will feel by and by, when you are buried. In a sane interval I discarded the pajamas and led a rational and comfortable life thenceforth. Out in the country in India the day begins early. One sees a plain, perfectly flat, dust-colored, and brickyardy, stretching limitlessly away on every side in the dim gray light, striped everywhere with hard-beaten narrow paths, the vast flatness broken at wide intervals by bunches of spectral trees that mark where villages are, and along all the paths are slender women and the black forms of lanky naked men moving to their work, the women with brass water jars on their heads, the men carrying hoes. The man is not entirely naked. Always there is a bit of white rag, a loin-cloth. It amounts to a bandage, and is a white accent on his black person, like the silver band around the middle of a pipe-stem. Sometimes he also wears a fluffy and voluminous white turban, and this adds a second accent. He then answers properly to Miss Gordon Cummings' flashlight picture of him as a person who is dressed in a turban and a pocket handkerchief. All day long one has this monotony of dust-colored dead levels and scattering bunches of trees and mud villages. You soon realize that India is not beautiful. Still there is an enchantment about it that is beguiling, and which does not pall. You cannot tell just what it is that makes the spell, perhaps, but you feel it and confess it nevertheless. Of course, at bottom you know in a vague way that it is history. It is that affects you. a haunting sense of the myriads of human lives that have blossomed and withered and perished here, repeating and repeating and repeating, century after century and age after age, the barren and meaningless process. It is this sense that gives to this forlorn, uncomely land power to speak to the spirit and make friends with it, to speak to it with a voice bitter with satire, but eloquent with melancholy. The deserts of Australia and the ice barrens of Greenland have no speech, for they have no venerable history, with nothing to tell of man and his vanities, his fleeting glories and his miseries. They have nothing wherewith to spiritualize their ugliness and veil it with a charm. There is nothing pretty about an Indian village, a mud one, and I do not remember that we saw any but mud ones on that long flight to Allahabad. It is a little bunch of dirt-colored mud hovels jammed together within a mud wall. As a rule, the rains had beaten down parts of some of the houses, and this gave the village the aspect of a moldering and hoary ruin. I believe the cattle and the vermin live inside the wall, for I saw cattle coming out and cattle going in, and whenever I saw a villager he was scratching. This last is only circumstantial evidence, but I think it has value. The village has a battered little temple or two, big enough to hold an idol, and with custom enough to fat up a priest and keep him comfortable. Where there are Mohammedans, there are generally a few sorry tombs outside the village that have a decayed and neglected look. The villages interested me because of things which Major Sleeman says about them in his books, particularly what he says about the division of labor in them. He says that the whole face of India is parceled out into estates of villages, that 9/10 of the vast population of the land consists of cultivators of the soil, that it is these cultivators who inhabit the villages, that there are certain established village servants, mechanics, and others who are apparently paid a wage by the village at large, and whose callings remain in certain families and are handed down from father to son, like an estate. He gives a list of these established servants: priest, blacksmith, carpenter, accountant, washerman, basket-maker, potter, watchman, barber, shoemaker, brazier, confectioner, weaver, dyer, etc. In his day witches abounded, and it was not thought good business wisdom for a man to marry his daughter into a family that hadn't a witch in it, for she would need a witch on the premises to protect her children from the evil spells which would certainly be cast upon them by the witches connected with the neighboring families. The office of midwife was hereditary in the family of the basket-maker. It belonged to his wife. She might not be competent, but the office was hers anyway. Her pay was not high, 25 cents for a boy, and half as much for a girl. The girl was not desired because she would be a disastrous expense by and by. As soon as she should be old enough to begin to wear clothes for propriety's sake, it would be a disgrace to the family if she were not married, and to marry her meant financial ruin, for by custom the father must spend upon feasting and wedding display everything he had and all he could borrow, in fact, reduce himself to a condition of poverty which he might never more recover from. It was the dread of this prospective ruin which made the killing of girl babies so prevalent in India in the old days before England laid the iron hand of her prohibitions upon the piteous slaughter. One may judge of how prevalent the custom was by one of Sleeman's casual electrical remarks when he speaks of children at play in villages where girl voices were never heard. The wedding display folly is still in full force in India, and by consequence the destruction of girl babies is still furtively practiced, but not largely, because of the vigilance of the government and the sternness of the penalties it levies. In some parts of India the village keeps in its pay 3 other servants: an astrologer to tell the villager when he may plant his crop, or make a journey, or marry a wife, or strangle a child, or borrow a dog, or climb a tree, or catch a rat, or swindle a neighbor, without offending the alert and solicitous heavens. And what his dream means, if he has had one, and was not bright enough to interpret it himself by the details of his dinner. The 2 other established servants were the tiger persuader and the hailstorm discourager. The one kept away the tigers if he could, and collected the wages anyway, and the other kept off the hailstorms, or explained why he failed. He charged the same for explaining a failure that he did for